I think last time we talked about how we were going to turn on you. I remember us doing that very recently. Our
Yeah.
heel
Me?
turn. Yeah.
Why would you guys want to turn on me? I'm an angel.
See, I think this is exactly how that conversation went.
Well, maybe we
Mhm.
should. What if I turn on both of you?
I
I mean,
feel like
you're
that would
welcome
be
to try.
ill-advised.
Yeah.
Well, hang on, whoa, Corey, what did you
What-
say?
I think that would be ill-advised.
Okay, cool. Because I like how John was like, "You can fucking try it."
I feel like it would be very akin to like Seth Rollins turning on the Shield.
Yeah, right.
Are you hitting
And look,
John in the back once,
whoa,
or am I the one
whoa.
that's going to eat a bunch of chair shots?
Look how that turned out. Seth Rollins won the heavyweight championship and then had the backing of Triple H. Right? That seemed pretty
guess.
good. What if I burn one of your houses down?
It's been.
I don't
done.
live in a house, so that would
What
be very
if I
difficult.
burn both of your houses down?
I don't live in a house again.
Yeah.
What if I burn down the building that you reside in down?
It's
Fucking
a very big
specific
building.
about it. Or you live in a house. You live in a structure of some kind. I could burn that down. All
Hi,
right.
everybody.
Well,
Welcome to the Smark Avengers. My name is Corey, and this is Dylan and John.
Hello.
We're just making noise.
Yeah, we're just, that's all this is, just mouth sounds.
We're just making noise. I wish.
Boop.
Boop, 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 boop.
Hello.
Woo. All right.
We're so good at this.
I love this.
Professionals. Yeah, 32 episodes. That's not bad.
What, HelloFresh. Well, you don't want to sponsor this? Corey, have you been
So-
Hobgoblin?
I bet, boy, that would be really. I'd be the worst Hobgoblin, considering I know next to nothing about the Hobgoblin.
I think me and John can both corroborate this and say, Corey, you're probably not the worst Hobgoblin.
So, if you've not guessed based off of the fact we've said the word Hobgoblin multiple times, today's episode is going to be a deep dive on the Hobgoblin. Which one? Probably all of them, because I think there
Corey.
have been a handful of them.
Corey is a Hobgoblin.
Yep.
John, real quick, have you had the beer called Hobgoblin?
I have.
What do you think?
It's not as good as the cider called Green Goblin.
Really? I've never seen the cider. We have Hobgoblin like all the time in like every shop. I've never seen a cider called Green Goblin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
pretty
a
decent.
shame. That's a shame because we're gonna get into the Hobgoblin, of course, but I always I
I've
always
had this stuff before.
Sorry?
I've had Hobgoblin before.
The drink. Isn't it
Yeah.
lovely?
It's okay.
It's nice. I've never had the Green Goblin though, and I think that that's appropriate because for me personally, and we've heard other opinions from John in the past, but for me, my favorite goblin is the Hobgoblin. And so I think it's kind of appropriate that I have never had the Green Goblin drink, but I have had Hobgoblin, whereas John thinks the Green Goblin drink is the better of the two Goblin drinks.
Yeah.
The,
I think that's pretty
the
appropriate.
label
don't
looks
you think?
the label looks cooler.
Yeah, but is the person cooler?
Yeah.
I mean, Norman Osborn
Whoa.
or Harry or
Well,
Peter, whoever the fuck's Green Goblin right now.
Can this whole show just be me and John like arguing about which Goblin is better?
Yeah, by all means, please do.
The thing is,
All
wait,
right.
hang on. I like the Hobgoblin though. He's before the Green Goblin ever came along on like the animated show. I was all about the Hobgoblin, and then
Yeah.
it was only after the show, and then I started like reading up more about the Green Goblin and Norman Osborn and all the terrible things that he did. That I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this guy's pretty good.
See, I think that's pretty funny because I did a similar thing, but when I read up about both of them, I always ended up thinking, and I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, but like every time, and there was a point, there's always a cutoff point for this, but I thought that Marvel were very smart about how they used the Hobgoblin as opposed to how they used the Green Goblin. And this definitely will come up in because the story of the Hobgoblin is very convoluted, but I really like a lot of the way they teased who it is and what he does and the reveal and all of that stuff. I found the Hobgoblin's appearances to be very impactful, whereas part of the problem I had with the Green Goblin was that you already knew that it was Norman Osborn.
Well, no.
Do you know what I mean?
I hard disagree. Like
Okay.
when he was introduced, there was like about 2 or 3 years worth of comics where you didn't know who the Green Goblin was, and he was like popping up all the time, and it was a mystery who was under the mask. So it was only after like the big reveal that obviously, yeah, everyone knows is Norman Osborn. But then that added like a whole brand new dynamic to the stories as well, because he was obviously Peter's best friend's dad. He had like a psychotic break where he keep forgetting he was the Green Goblin, and then things would trigger him and push him over the edge. And obviously, he ended up knowing Peter's secret identity as well. So that ended up, bringing plenty of drama into the comics as well.
Okay, well, let me clarify real quick. I'm not going to try to have a goblin off with John.
You guys
But
are always goblin over there.
we're always gobbling something.
Hey,
What are we gobbling? That's for the Patreon. But what I mean what I mean is, like, obviously, like, part of the draw about the original Green Goblin was once we knew it was Norman Osborn, that it added a level of intrigue. But I mean, like, after that happened, the intrigue was that every time you see Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin is right around the corner. Like, that happened, and that happened for 20 at least 20 to 30 years before the Hobgoblin even appeared.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Hobgoblin appeared, they had a lot of mystery for a long time. And again, we're going to cover this. This might be to their detriment, but there was so much mystery about who Hobgoblin was. Even when they revealed who the Hobgoblin was, that wasn't even true. There was still mystery. People still weren't sure if that was correct or not. They left a lot of trails. Every single story with the Hobgoblin meant something. It had a lot of like little trail breadcrumbs to it that made you want to stick around and see what happened next. Which, like I said, with the Norman Osborn one, is once you knew Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin, then you got the expectation that once you saw Norman Osborn, you're going to see the Green Goblin.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the Hobgoblin story, through like misdirection or through bad publication decisions or whatever, could be whatever you want. Quite similar to the Clone Saga, where they didn't know what they were doing. Maybe it made it seem like haphazard at the time, but like reading it back now, it all like plays out really, really, really well, because it adds so much mystery to who the Hobgoblin is until even when they finally reveal who the Hobgoblin like truly was, there's still mystery about it. Every single time after that, the true Hobgoblin turns up. It's a banger of a story. But I will say to you, John, every time after that, the Green Goblin has turned up, it's not always a banger story.
I mean, hold on. Every time the Hobgoblin showed up, pretty much since the Roderick Kingsley reveal,
the true Hobgoblin,
it's been awful. There's not been
a true Hobgoblin.
There's not been a decent Hobgoblin story for a long, long time.
I don't like Ben Urich as the Hobgoblin.
Mm-hmm.
But I like Roderick Kingsley as a Hobgoblin, and every time he's come back, it's been fun.
Can I request real quick? We just kind of level set.
No, we're arguing.
I was gonna say, like, from somebody who does not know anything about the Hobgoblin, which would be me. I knew absolutely nothing about this character. Let's start at the beginning. Okay. Who is the Hobgoblin?
You are.
Not just who's under the mask, but like, what's the deal? How is he different from the Green Goblin? When did he first show up? Let's start a trail.
Okay.
Because I feel like right now we just paratroopered into the jungle. Yeah. And like shots are coming at us from all directions.
Correct. We really went straight into like which is the better goblin, which was probably the wrong direction.
You're passionate. I like it.
Well, we're both passionate about our favorite goblins. Corey, who's your favorite goblin? Gray?
I like Shaza, who's a goblin in Baldur's Gate 3 that you find in a cage.
Corey.
I like the Goblin Queen.
Corey.
I'm not a Spider-Man person. What can I tell you?
Pick a goblin.
I mean, I like Norman. I think
There you
Norman's
go.
great.
That's fine. That's fair enough. At least you picked a side.
Honestly, I really like Harry as well. I kind of like the idea of Harry
Yeah, I
succumbing
like the
to it.
idea of Harry as
I feel like they didn't
goblin.
really do enough with it, though.
Right, I
I
agree.
feel like they killed him off too soon.
I think that there was like a really good story they could have told there. Because
They're
that would have
always
been
killing
perfect.
Harry off too soon. I mean, didn't they just resurrect him and then they killed him again?
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's
Anyway,
complicated.
Yeah, this is about the Hobgoblin, not.
Speaking of needlessly complicated, here's the story of the Hobgoblin. So. Oh boy.
Oh dear. So he, as a character, debuted in 1983 in Amazing Spider-Man 238, created by Roger Stern and John Romita Jr.
The best.
Yeah. Basically, what happened was, like a run-of-the-mill bank robber, like escaped from Spider-Man into the sewers and stumbled upon one of Norman Osborn's secret Green Goblin hideouts, complete with all the like weapons and gears and old journals and stuff like that. So he decided to sell that information to some shadowy character who he took to this hideout and then helped clear out all the stuff. And then no sooner had he done all that than this shadowy character killed him, so as to make sure that there was nothing to connect him to uh, all this stuff that had just been stolen and what he might do with it. So basically what he did was jazz it up, change the color scheme, add a cape and a hood, because why not? And yeah, he created the identity of the Hobgoblin and figured he'd pick up where the Green Goblin left off. Only trouble is he fought Spider-Man and got his ass kicked because Spider-Man's got superpowers and this guy did not. So he started going through all the old Norman Osborn journals and found out about like the goblin serum, and so he started experimenting with that, trying to perfect it so if he used it, it wouldn't like turn him insane like it did with Norman, but just give him like the super strength and super speed and all that kind of thing. So to do that, he basically brainwashed a guy called Lefty Donovan, who was just like a small-time career criminal. Used a machine to make him do his bidding, basically. Dressed him up as the Hobgoblin, gave him this experimental version of the Goblin serum, and yeah, sent him off to fight Spider-Man. And somehow Lefty Donovan held his own, and it was only because the brainwashing started to slip that he, started to lose the fight. At which point, this shadowy figure sent the Goblin glider crashing into a building to kill him. Again, just to make sure there's nothing leading back to him. But once he knew that this new version of the serum worked, he was like, okay, now I'll inject it into myself and become super strong as well. At which point he starts trying to amass like a criminal empire, like blackmailing all these prominent individuals in New York and trying to use like this battle van that Norman had built to take out Spider-Man. And yeah, he sort of held his own for a bit. Again, with like the mystery of his identity carry on all throughout. But eventually, like, he fights Spider-Man, and then the battle van that he been using ended up like crashing into the Hudson River, and seemed like Hobgoblin was dead, maybe, but clearly he wasn't, because this is comic books.
Yep.
And so then he came back and started teaming up with the Rose, who was another masked character with like a mystery identity, who, spoiler alert, was Richard Fisk, aka the Kingpin's son. And they started like buddying up and trying to take over the Kingpin's territory, basically.
Which you think about it is a really good idea. Like, the Hobgoblin is clearly like some sort of branch away from the Green Goblin, and the Rose is clearly a branch off of the Kingpin. So you can see that kind of like that new generation, kind of like, why wouldn't they team up? Like, that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the Green Goblin and the Kingpin, who would never have teamed up just because of their own like ideological values. Whereas if you think about the Kingpin, the Rose and the Hobgoblin, their entire career is just built on like being the most powerful person that they can be. Makes sense to like symbiote against each other,
Yeah. So around this time, Roger Stern left the book after having, co-created the Hobgoblin and written all of his stories up to that point. And
That's
Tom
never a good sign when that
DeFalco
happens.
came in and picked up the mantle, and that was sort of covering Hobgoblin, sort of playing second fiddle to the Rose, and like he's not quite got as much agency of his own anymore. He's like more working with the Rose and or under the Rose even. So he's basically become a bit of a lackey at that point. But then like he's still got like storylines going on. Like there's this whole situation with Flash Thompson, who was having a bit of a rough patch after coming back from I guess it was Vietnam, but this must have been years after.
So did he lose his legs in Vietnam?
No,
No,
Okay,
that
was
later. Yeah.
Okay.
that was Afghanistan, right?
I guess so.
I think so. It was that kind of time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sliding time scale becomes a fucking bitch when you start naming specific countries.
Flash was having a rough time. He'd split with his girlfriend, and then he started pretty much seeing Betty Brant, and like they were both leaning on each other because Betty Brant had split from her husband Ned Leeds. But it turns out that Ned Leeds was the Hobgoblin,
What?
or at least
All along?
he seemed that way, and he wasn't too keen on seeing his estranged wife like getting close to Flash Thompson, so he decided to frame Flash as the Hobgoblin, like luring Spider-Man into like a situation where like an explosion went off and there's the Hobgoblin's body like lying on the floor, and he pulls off the mask and it's Flash, and then planting evidence in Flash's apartment as well, so it all looks as if it's him who's always been under the mask.
So like, yeah, for reference, the audience doesn't know.
No, the audience.
That Ned Leeds was supposedly the Hobgoblin.
Indeed.
Whenever Spider-Man finds out that Flash Thompson appears to be the Hobgoblin, that's what the audience also appears to realize. So like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, I think if you read the comics, you can tell that there's probably something else going on.
Yes, 100%.
There's a lot of mystery. Like, obviously, Flash Thompson isn't the Hobgoblin. There's framing going on, but you don't know who could be the Hobgoblin. There's no other visible explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to point out that New York is a city with like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and it's so interesting, like all this shit happens around Peter Parker.
7 people that he knows.
Yeah, like the 7 people he knows are all coincidentally also villains and or heroes.
Flash Thompson again? God damn it,
Yeah, like Jesus Christ, Flash. Keep your nose clean.
Well,
You've been Hobgoblin, Venom, Anti-Venom,
what's he gonna be next?
Carnage,
Spider-Man?
Anti-Hobgoblin.
Toxin.
Anti-Hobgoblin?
Anti.
Wasn't there like a cyber Hobgoblin at one point?
Yes, we'll get to that. Don't worry.
We'll get
Okay,
there.
cool.
We'll get there.
I remember I had a trick card.
I think we actually talked about Cyber Hobgoblin before.
Quite possibly.
Because I talked about it for sure. I 100% talked about it. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, Flash was framed, but then, like, I think the real Hobgoblin, or at least his stand-in, was like still flying about, so that kind of made it
Ruined
obvious
that.
yeah, he wasn't really the Hobgoblin. But yeah, then there was some more behind-the-scenes movement when Tom DeFalco got moved off the book, and his plans for the reveal kind of got undone as well. So I think at this point, Marvel's editorial staff were just like, we need to reveal this because it's been too long now. It's been like 3 or 4 years at this point.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
And we've had a lot of red herrings, but we've not given the people what they want.
How long had it been?
Well,
when did you say you came in?
He debuted in 1983, and we're up to, I think, late 1986.
7. Yeah, we're getting close to. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're talking 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
But the reveal doesn't actually happen in Amazing Spider-Man. It happens in a Spider-Man versus Wolverine one-shot, where Spider-Man, or Peter Parker, and Ned Leeds sent to Germany on assignment for the Daily Bugle, and Peter's out investigating this or that, and he comes back to their hotel and he finds Ned like tied to a chair, his throat slit, and he's like wearing the Hobgoblin's outfit. So all evidence points to Ned being the Hobgoblin, and Spidey even like goes and confronts the Kingpin when he gets back to New York, who shows him some sort of file which seems to corroborate that story. And so yeah, it seems like, oh wow, Ned Leeds was the Hobgoblin all along.
I mean, can I just like really quickly say that, if they were really obviously going to plant Flash Thompson as the Hobgoblin, which they did, and then the way that they reveal Ned Leeds as the real Hobgoblin is to just plant him as a Hobgoblin. Do you know what I mean? Like, they dressed up a dead body in the Hobgoblin suit. You're like, well, that's all the evidence I need. You know what I mean?
They in the next edition of the next issue of Spider-Man 289, which was written by Peter David, they did sort of expand on how he died, and like it turns out it was these sort of mercenaries / assassins who worked for a guy called the Foreigner, who had been hired by Jason Macendale.
I would say Macendale.
We'll start with that.
Well, I think for now, because he's going to come back later, we'll say stick with Macendale.
Yes. So he had hired the Foreigner to basically kill the Hobgoblin, not knowing who he was or anything, but he wanted to assume his identity because up until that point, Macendale had been a guy called Jack-O-Lantern.
Jack-O-Lantern.
Yes. Sort of a
real low level mercenary kind of guy, like really like pretty like down the totem pole of Spider-Man villains.
I mean, he just wore a big pumpkin on his head and like jumped on some sort of
flying
springy
disc.
thing.
Like
Yeah.
But he wanted more. Macendale wanted way more, and that's important as well. Like that's we should right now make it very clear that Macendale wanted to be a bigger deal in the villainary sense.
Yes,
so
100%.
He went from Jack-O-Lantern, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to be the new Hobgoblin. So he went to try to find out who the real Hobgoblin was. He assumed he found it, and he said, we're going to frame that guy. We're going to steal his costume, kill that guy. He didn't say frame him. He said, I'm going to
Yeah.
kill that guy. I'm going to take his costume. I'm the new Hobgoblin.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jason Macendale, and now we're talking like 87,
Yeah.
I think, 88, 87.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Macendale upgraded himself from being the Jack-o'-lantern, who nobody gave a fuck about, to the Hobgoblin, who, as we've established for the last 4 years, people have been talking about. So that would seem to give Macendale that push that he needed.
Only it didn't really work out for him because he was still the same loser.
He was
under
still
the
Jason
mask.
Macendale.
Yeah.
Correct. And this, this is a wonderful thing I love about like comics and like other media, is that like it's not the suit that makes the character. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about this with Venom. You put Venom on Eddie Brock, that's Venom. But you put that suit on somebody else, that's not Venom.
Mm-hmm.
You can dress it up like that. You can pretend it's Flash Thompson. It's not Venom. It's Eddie Brock. And I think this is a very classic case of that. And that's kind of what I love about Macendale, is that you can give him whatever suit you want, but it's just not gonna work. He's just not that guy.
Funny you should say that, because once he realizes that, being Hobgoblin wasn't working out for him, he basically struck a deal with a demon.
Yes.
During the Inferno crisis, where like
Classic.
New York was, I think, partly merged with Limbo. And yeah, he got imbued with all these new powers, like possessed by a demon. And it still didn't work. He basically was still a
kind
loser.
of did, because what he wanted to be the most powerful villain. And so then because he went from like a low level like fucking asshole, and then he went to the Hobgoblin, which is what he wanted. But what he didn't realize was that being the Hobgoblin took a lot of work and effort and like manipulation. The Hobgoblin didn't just become the Hobgoblin. He didn't just survive as a Hobgoblin, right? There was a lot going along with it. He's saying he's the Hobgoblin, but just saying you're the Hobgoblin doesn't make you the Hobgoblin that we saw years before that, because the Hobgoblin that we saw years before that would take the fight to Spider-Man. And this new Hobgoblin wasn't doing that. And that's why he thought it was necessary for him to like make a deal with the demon during the Inferno crisis, where he thought, I'm going to get this demon to like make me more powerful. So therefore people will take me as a big deal. That's one thing I really liked about old Spider-Man comics, was there was a really big idea where people were like, I want people to think that I'm a really big time villain. I don't think you see that much anymore, but I don't know if it's just Spider-Man or other comics, but there used to be a big ideal where people thought, I want you to think of me as a big time villain. And Jason Macendale, all the way through his career, always wanted to be a big time villain. And I kind of love that about him. He had ambition,
Yeah, he's a lovable loser.
He's a loser, but he tries, and that's why you kind of want to root for him in a way, So he decided to bond his soul to a demon to make himself more powerful, and that's how we got the Demo Goblin.
Yeah, well, essentially, he didn't realize that, being possessed by a demon, the demon might, not play ball, basically.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, like they sort of battled over his soul and his body, and then the Demo Goblin basically split off into its own entity.
Yes.
And Macendale was back to square one. So this is where he gets the cybernetic enhancements after allying with Gaunt, who was our old friend Mendelstrom,
who we talked about in the Ben Riley Clone Saga episode.
Indeed.
Go back and watch that episode if you want to, because this is why I know we talked about Jason Macendale as a Hobgoblin before, because
Well,
this
we
is
also
when
talked about him in our pick our Sinister Six, because in my all goblins team I needed one, and I'm like, Jason Macendale sounds like a name.
he is a name,
Yep,
but
that
had
was the
many
effort I
different
put into it.
names. That's the trick
So if
about
I
Jason
could,
Macendale.
if I could throw something out at, do you know, like, behind the scenes, if the whole like make a deal with a demon, get cybernetic parts, was it like a conscious effort of like, we gotta make Hobgoblin different than Green Goblin because it's gonna get confusing if we don't?
I think
Well-
at the time, no. I'm sorry to cut you off, John, but I would say
Mm.
at the time, no, because at the time the Green Goblin had been dead.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, like
Okay.
Harry
Green Goblin
had
was
definitely
dead.
died by this point. Yeah.
He'd been dead for years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What they were
I was
doing
just
was trying to
curious.
make this Hobgoblin different from other Hobgoblins. Honestly, I think that's what it was. I think they were
Yeah.
trying to make a distinction between this Hobgoblin and to make him a big deal against the new threat of Ben Riley, as opposed to other Hobgoblins that were fighting Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they weren't even thinking about that kind of thing, because even at the time of the Clone Saga, they hadn't come up with the end game idea that Norman Osborn was going to be the big boss at the end of it. Like they had no idea that, like, when they introduced Jason Macendale as a Hobgoblin with the cybernetic enhancements, they had no idea that the end game would eventually be Norman Osborn with the Green Goblin identity. Otherwise, that would have probably tied into it somehow. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
two
Sure.
goblins. Because one of the things people were begging out for a long time, the reason the Hobgoblin existed, like John said, he ravaged the Green Goblin's caches of weapons. We only had one goblin at a time. So it wasn't until after the Clone Saga when we had two goblins.
Well,
You know
we
what I
did
mean?
have a brief storyline in the 80s where I think it was Macendale's Hobgoblin went against Harry's Green Goblin.
Well, what happened then?
I think it was a stalemate, and
Right.
no one really won.
Right, because that wasn't part of the plan. And that was part of what I don't like about them making Harry Osborn the Green Goblin, is that a lot of it didn't seem like they had a plan for it. And they should have, and they could have, and it would have been great. But like, I always thought that the reason they brought in the Hobgoblin was to fill in the goblin hole that Norman left. And it's quite clear. I mean, it's just the way the writing was. It's quite clear that that Harry didn't fill in that gap. The Hobgoblin did. The Hobgoblin felt like a legit villain right off the bat. Whereas with Harry as Green Goblin, it felt a retread of old ground, and B, a betrayal of the Harry Osborn character. And I don't necessarily buy that. I think that Harry Osborn as Green Goblin could have been a really good idea. But I feel like the fan consensus was that it was just a retread of old ground, and it was betrayal of the Harry Osborn character. Whereas when you get earlier, like, into the 90s, the Hobgoblin is the only goblin around. That's just the way it is. Like, the common knowledge is that Norman Osborn has been dead for years, and by the 90s, Harry Osborn has been dead for a number of years as well. The only goblin left is the Hobgoblin. So I think them giving him cybernetic abilities wasn't a way to differentiate him from the other goblins. It was really just a way to kind of jazz up the Hobgoblin for the 90s. That's what I think it was. It wasn't like to make him different from the other goblins. It was really just to, like, it was the night. We've talked a billion times about the 90s, about how different it was and how we had to make everything different and super fucking over the top. You know what I mean? Superman died, Batman died, Ben Riley was new Spider-Man. They had to make something different. And so they had the Hobgoblin come out with like all this cybernetic stuff. And again, I'll tell you this: he was mostly drawn by J.R. Jr. and it looked beautiful. And when I started reading comics in the Clone Saga, the Hobgoblin, I think it was Carnage, and then it was the Hobgoblin were like the two main villains that I ever got to see. And around this time is probably around the time I was watching the TV show where the Hobgoblin was a very big, prominent character. And so I fell in love with that Hobgoblin. The cybernetic Hobgoblin, I wanted him to come back a million times over. I loved him. And they used him for like twice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They used him twice.
And then
it
they
hurt
killed
me.
him off.
And then they killed him off. And I loved the Hobgoblin. I loved him. But again, the problem with that was the Jason Macendale version of the Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
And
As we've established, he was a loser.
as we've established, one, he was a loser, and two, he was not the Hobgoblin.
Indeed.
We have established that Jason Macendale stole the identity of what we thought was Ned Leeds. But he stole the identity of the Hobgoblin for himself. And the whole reason about the Hobgoblin being Ned Leeds was a big deal because it made a little bit of sense. Why wouldn't a guy like the Hobgoblin, he would have all of this knowledge about Leeds, about criminal activity and stuff like this? Doesn't it make sense that it might be somebody that like has a lead into this stuff, like a journalist? It falls apart when you think about like Ned Leeds physically. He doesn't look like a Hobgoblin. But then if you think about the Goblin Serum and what it does to you, like, doesn't it make sense that you could make a guy like Ned Leeds appear to be himself, but be physically much stronger than he is with the serum? That makes sense. Doesn't it make sense that he would have access to a lot of records that maybe a lot of other people wouldn't have access to because he's a journalist? Yes. Doesn't it make sense that like he could get access to all of this stuff as the Hobgoblin and then later on report on it as Ned Leeds? Yes, it does. Like, they were doing a very good job of like leading you down a path to like let's be honest, none of us believed that Flash Thompson was a Hobgoblin.
No, it's pretty clear that he wasn't.
Correct. But the Ned Leeds thing, it seemed unlikely, but it didn't seem unbelievable.
No.
Right. And then once Jason Macendale became the Hobgoblin, that was believable, like 100%. He was the Hobgoblin. They unmasked him. It was him. He's the Hobgoblin. So like, okay, cool. We're at the point in the mid-90s where we know the Hobgoblin was Jason Macendale, and before that, it was Ned Leeds. That should put the point on things perfectly, shouldn't it?
Well, it should do. But
should
then Roger Stern came back to Marvel and was like, hey guys, I want to tell the story I wanted to tell 10 years ago, but
I think, by the way, I think that's the perfect way to do things. The way they did things is like the bait and switch. You know, you start off, you write a character, you leave all the the breadcrumbs, leave the trail, leave for a little bit, watch how everybody else fucks it up, then come back 10 years later and go, let me just connect the dots for you. You know what I mean? Because I feel like, and I honestly believe this because I don't have a whole lot of like actual comics in my possession, but some of the ones I do have are the actual like the Hobgoblin reveal comic. I have them. I have the Hobgoblin reveal comics in my possession. I fucking love them. I love the way they did it. I'm just hyped about it. So, John, if you want to go ahead.
Okie doke. Well, yeah, basically, Roger Stern came back and got to tell the story he wanted to tell, which involved the real Hobgoblin showing up and basically killing Jason Macendale because he was such an embarrassment as the Hobgoblin that he was like, okay, I'll just take back my identity then.
Yes.
And yeah, so he starts doing all of his hobgoblin-y things he likes to do, like messing up people's shit and whatnot.
Stealing.
Yeah, but at this point, Betty Brant is like investigating the true identity because she wants to, clear the name of her estranged dead husband. And yeah, like it all leads to the uncovering of the real identity of the Hobgoblin, which was
Corey.
Yeah.
After all we revealed about this Hobgoblin, can you decipher who the real Hobgoblin truly was?
Is it somebody that we've never been introduced to before?
Kind of.
Okay, I would not know.
I will say that it's somebody that you and me and John have not been introduced to in this conversation. But if you read the comics, you have been introduced to this man.
But at the same time, he was a pretty forgettable character when he was introduced.
Correct.
I think,
but possibly on purpose.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Basically, it is a fella by the name of Roderick Kingsley, who was a prominent fashion designer in New York, who I think Mary Jane worked for him.
Yes, he worked for Mary Jane.
He was a bit of a snob and a bit sort of effeminate and like a bit of a diva, basically, I think. But I think it turns out that was just him putting on a bit of an act to, I guess, throw people off the scent. But yeah, so he was the original guy who, stumbled upon Norman's hideout and messed with the goblin formula to get rid of the insanity, and then framed Flash Thompson and then Ned Leeds and used Lefty Donovan as like a puppet, and he was the master manipulator. So much so that he was even manipulating his own twin brother, Daniel, into kind of taking on the goblin identity as well at certain points. And yeah, so his identity is finally revealed. Spider-Man captures him, sends him to prison. Seems like it's game over. But then, as we've talked about, who should reappear at the end of the Clone Saga but Norman Osborn? And Kingsley sort of took it as an affront that Osborn was back and claiming that he wasn't the Goblin but like a victim of the Goblin. And he threatened to reveal a journal which had all of Norman's secrets, including all of his time as the Green Goblin, to the world, basically. So Norman, as the Green Goblin, went and confronted him. They had a bit of a to-do. And yeah, eventually Norman basically takes over all of Kingsley's companies and fortune, whilst Roderick escapes to the Caribbean and essentially retires as the Hobgoblin, which is basically where we leave the character for about 10 years or so. Not until much later in the day when it seems like the Hobgoblin is planning his return to New York. He shows up at one of his safe houses and starts getting his gear together. Only what should happen, but a fella by the name of Phil Urich shows up, who was briefly the Green Goblin in the 90s as a hero.
Green Goblin.
I think we talked about that, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. It was the Changes That Didn't Stick episode.
Indeed. So Phil Urich shows up and seemingly kills Roderick Kingsley, but it actually turns out it was his twin brother Daniel who got murdered. But yeah, Phil steals his identity and becomes a brand new Hobgoblin with some brand new technology. And yeah, essentially he has about as much luck as any of the other Hobgoblins, which is to say, not much luck at all.
Nope.
But yeah, that again draws Roderick back to New York after being in semi-retirement for a while. And yeah, he fights Phil Urich, and I think he basically wins and tells him, okay, you can continue being the Hobgoblin, but now you have to give me a cut of all your profits, or else, basically. So yeah, that was the status quo for a little bit, until Urich basically couldn't pay him anymore because he wasn't making enough money because he sucked so bad as the Hobgoblin. And yeah, what happened next? So he got arrested and sent to prison, and then busted out by Norman Osborn and drafted into the Goblin Nation.
Goblin Army.
Yeah, and given a new identity as the Goblin Knight.
Goblin King. Yes, the Goblin Knight. Sorry, the
Yes.
Goblin King was Norman.
That was Norman. Yes.
Yes.
But that basically
they thought it was a good idea to like bring all the goblins together.
Yeah, which makes a sort of sense, I guess.
Because they had so many goblins. They had the Green Goblin, they had the Hobgoblin, they had Menace that wasn't not a goblin, but they pretended it was a goblin.
Yeah, well, she'd taken the goblin serum and it had a weird effect on her.
And that was it? That was the 3 goblins?
I'm sure there was more.
So then the Goblin Nation?
But whilst they were doing their Goblin Nation thing, Roderick basically became Hobgoblin again. And he also, at this point, like inspired by his, partnership, if you can call it that, with Urich and getting a cut of all of his profits, he started selling off other criminal identities to like low rent criminals, and making money from that as well.
Yeah.
And then eventually he gets sort of drafted into the Axis event where
I am not sure how he ends up being drafted into this.
It was
That's
Magneto.
what annoys me about this. I think if you look at this really gets me, because what I loved about the whole Hobgoblin thing, Roderick Kingsley through this whole thing has been the most smart man in the entire Marvel universe. Mm-hmm. He's been so clever. He's played everything perfectly. He framed Ned Leeds. He's framed Flash Thompson. He's become the Hobgoblin. He framed himself as his twin brother, Daniel. He got a cut of all of the Hobgoblin stuff. He has played everything. John, whenever I said I loved everything about the Hobgoblin, every Hobgoblin story has been good. This is what I'm talking about. I mean, like after Axis, I don't know anything about what happens after Axis, right? But this is what I was talking about. I mean that, like, we talk about his introduction up to Axis, everything has been played perfectly. If you think about one man playing the chess pieces of life, he has done it so well. He has just been able to like manipulate everything so that he just ends up with a bankroll of money, and he does practically fuck all. That's what I loved about the Hobgoblin. It's all been played perfectly. And then what I don't understand, and maybe somebody can explain it to me, maybe John can explain it to me, I don't know. But I'm saying up to Axis, it's been perfect, right? Then Axis comes along, and then he just is Hobgoblin again.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he has willingly said he will franchise out the Hobgoblin to make himself money while he sits on a Caribbean beach and smokes weed. Forget that. Just out of nowhere, he decides, yeah, I'll hang out with a Red Skull or whatever the fuck. I'll just be here. Like, why? Mm-hmm. Like, why would Roderick, out of all the smart stuff Roderick Kingsley has done, why wouldn't he send some other fucking guy to be the Hobgoblin at that exact moment? Right? Yep. If you were to say, listen, Magneto was coming up to you and said, dude, Onslaught come back. Remember Onslaught? The biggest fucking deal of the 90s? He's back, but he's also back with a Red Skull. What do we do? If I was Roderick Kingsley, I'd be like, yeah, okay, give me 5 minutes to train up a guy.
Yeah.
Right? And then he can fucking be the Hobgoblin. What benefit do I like? The thing about Roderick Kingsley was he always had a benefit to it. He always had monetary gain or something to gain from it. What the fuck would why would he go into fighting Onslaught? There's no
he
monetary gain for him.
He always had like a dummy to take his place, basically.
Yes,
Like
there
he
was
wouldn't
always
put himself in danger
proxy.
when he could brainwash someone and stick them in the costume and have them do the
Exactly.
job for him.
If he had to fight Spider-Man or if he had to fight Green Goblin, he would do it because of his own ego, right? Fair enough. But if he didn't, then he wouldn't. So why the fuck would he fight whatever the fuck Onslaught was? If I was him, I would stay the fucking well away from that. And that's what he should have done. I don't understand why they thought it was a good idea to write the Roderick Kingsley, especially after the fact that they did a really good job of establishing that Roderick Kingsley always fucking hands that shit off to somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
They made a really big deal of establishing that Roderick Kingsley hands all this shit off to somebody else so they can worry about that and he can just smoke a cigar in Cuba. I just don't understand why they thought, yes, the Hobgoblin that turns up at Axis is going to be Roderick Kingsley. So I will admit that this is a low point for the Hobgoblin as Roderick Kingsley.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got to say about that.
Well, yeah. And there's not a lot much else to say, really. Like, the Axis event sort of turned him into not a good guy, but he was more he somehow became more of a hero to the people of New York. So yeah, he was basically turned into a good guy, became like a hero in New York somehow, but I don't know the specifics because I've not read the comics, and I tried reading the Wikipedia page and just it didn't grab me at all, and I zoned out.
Yeah.
But yeah, he eventually gets drafted by Steve Rogers to help fight Red Onslaught, and not even Red Onslaught at that point. I think it was to fight the X-Men, who were going to do something to kind of kill everyone on the planet who wasn't a mutant, because they'd obviously become evil at that point, because that was the whole point of the Access storyline. But yeah, long story short, he got switched back, became evil again, continued to sell costumes and identities of other costume criminals to new clients. Most recently, we've seen that Ned Leeds came back to life as well.
Because nobody dies.
Nobody dies. In fact, he came back to life twice because he was resurrected as part of the clone conspiracy storyline, I think it was called. Dead No More.
Yes. Yeah, clone conspiracy. Yeah.
Yeah, and his clone was rocking around for a bit until it got killed, and then all of a sudden the real Ned Leeds showed up, having apparently before him and Peter had gone to Berlin, he'd found one of Norman Osborn's like safe houses in Europe, which is where Norman was hiding out at the time. And then he managed to take some goblin formula, which didn't have an effect on him right away. But then when the foreigners' assassins killed him, that sort of activated it, and he came back to life, and then spent the next however many years hiding out until he, I guess, figured it was time to come back to New York. And yeah, so he's sort of become the Hobgoblin again, sort of working under Roderick Kingsley, I think. I think both of them at some point worked for the Goblin Queen. But yeah, that's basically where we are now with two Hobgoblins.
Well, what do you think about Ned Leeds becoming the real Hobgoblin?
I think that's, well, I don't know. It's
Okay.
because I think the Roderick Kingsley reveal was great,
Yes.
and then everything after that, I'm not that big of a fan of at all.
Okay.
But the Ned Leeds reveal sort of made sense as well, even though it was kind of like thrown together and not the original plan. I think
Yep.
it sort of worked. But like I'm not super keen on the idea of going back to the well of making Ned the Hobgoblin again after all these years. But I guess I need to read those comics and kind of form a better opinion on it, really.
Right. Like I'm not super into that idea, but then I have read the comics from the Hobgoblin's inception all the way up until whenever Phil Urich became not the Hobgoblin.
Mm-hmm.
I read all of those comics and I've loved them. I always thought that there were so many twists and turns in such a fun, unique way that I always thought whenever I saw the Hobgoblin turn up, it was something different, you know? And that's to our earlier argument about an hour ago when we started this show. I always loved the Hobgoblin because there was always the air of mystery. Even whenever Phil Urich killed the Hobgoblin, he didn't really kill the Hobgoblin. And I really liked that. There was so much mystery about it. And once you bring in Ned Leeds, who used to be the Hobgoblin, that was part of the mystery, and then you make him one of the goblins that works for Roderick Kingsley, you're like, I'm sure that might. I haven't read those issues, so I'm not sure how that works. It might work. It doesn't sound like it works. But to their credit, a lot of the stuff we've said up to this point doesn't sound like it works, but it does. This is why I love the Hobgoblin to death, is because when he came in up until the Phil Urich run that I read, it's all been great. Even the Jason Macendale stuff has been great because that's part of the Hobgoblin mythos. Him being a shitty Hobgoblin is part of the Hobgoblin storyline. You know what I mean? It's like Harry Osborn being a shitty Green Goblin. It's part of that storyline. So I've loved it all for like a long time. I don't know what they're doing with Hobgoblin right now, but then again, I don't know what they're doing with a lot of like Marvel characters these days. I'm not as up to date as you guys might be. I'm very like set in my ways, I will say. I haven't read a whole lot of stuff after maybe like 2015, 16.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit later than that, but like the last 2 or 3 years I've not read. And I'm okay with that because to me, Roderick Kingsley will always be the Hobgoblin. And then a close second is Jason Macendale because that was the Hobgoblin that I grew up with in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
That bizarre guy that wanted to make himself a goblin demon and then wanted to make himself weaponized and like a cyborg. I love the ambition of Jason Macendale. And it's so funny that he had the ambition, but he just didn't have the psychology to be a goblin, you know? And I really like that about him. So Hobgoblin, if we can put a fine point on this, which we probably should, because I think we've got to pretty much the point of the Hobgoblin story. And I will say this for me at least, and then you guys can talk. But for me, the Hobgoblin is one of my like most favorite Spider-Man villains. I think I rate the Hobgoblin very highly, and it's because of like a lot of different things. I think that, like I've said, the Hobgoblin from his inception until the Phil Urich run have been very full of surprises that twist and turn, but not in like a fucking oh, what the fuck kind of way, but like more in a like, all right, well, what happens next kind of way. I will admit that the more recent stuff has been a little bit more, oh, okay, kind of way, and not, you know what I mean? I'm not like a fun surprise, but like oh, like finding out that, if I may bring back the title of our show again to the Smark Avengers and say that it's like finding out that Vince McMahon's son was Hornswoggle. You're like, oh, really? You know what I mean? That's why I feel a lot of like modern Hobgoblin stuff is. Whereas old Hobgoblin stuff, I adore because they kept you on your toes, and it didn't wear out its welcome, even though it probably should have.
Mhm.
So that's what I think, and I'm gonna open the floor up to you guys. You can say your pieces about the wonderful Hobgoblin right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think my opinion is he was a great character up until the reveal of Roderick Kingsley, where that was sort of where the mystery sort of went out of it. I think, like, even when he showed up and seemingly got killed off and replaced by Phil Urich, like, as soon as that issue came out, people were already saying, "Oh, I bet it was his twin brother." And lo and
And then it
behold,
was.
it totally was. Yeah.
Yep.
So, like, yeah, I think once
But that's
you,
part of the story.
yeah, but I mean, like, that's the thing though. Like, it was interesting and until like it got a definite reveal, and then it was just like, okay, so where do you go from here though?
Right. I mean, the good thing about a lot of the Hobgoblin stuff was that they didn't have a proper, definite reveal. Like you said, it started in 84,
83 was his
83, and
debut. Yeah.
the proper reveal of the Hobgoblin as Roderick Kingsley, I think, was like 1997.
Yes, I believe so.
So like, there's a big gap there. Like, they didn't just like fucking switch it up and reveal it. They had bait and switches all the way through it, but
Mhm.
they didn't give you the full reveal. And like, again, like we said, part of that might have been problems within like the actual workings of the comic book industry, the writers, whatever. But also, like, when you look at it from a reader point of view, it works perfectly to have this wonderful reveal that takes, 15 years to reveal. Like,
Mhm.
it's fun. You want to revel in that. And I love that about the Hobgoblin, that they don't just throw you out the reveal straight away. They make you work for it, and the way they did it actually works. You know what I mean? And I know that John might not be super into what happened after that, but I will say that from after that up until the Phil Urich stuff, I did enjoy the Hobgoblin. Every time I saw the Hobgoblin, I did pop. I was just like, I loved it. After that, I didn't like. I mean, I will say that I didn't like Phil Urich as the Hobgoblin, but then I didn't like Phil Urich as the Green Goblin. So should we count that? You know what I mean? Like, does that count?
So
Okay.
I want to know, after all this, what do you think of the Hobgoblin now that you know his
Yes,
entire history? And
Corey, what do you think? What do you think about the Hobgoblin? Who's your favorite Hobgoblin? And other questions you have about the Hobgoblin? Tell us.
I mean, I feel like you guys painted a very biased picture towards Roderick Kingsley. For one, everybody else,
No, we
yeah, that
didn't.
guy's garbage.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. I was very clear that I love Jiz Macendale as a Hobgoblin.
Yeah, you like, but see, like that's the thing is like, I won't lie. A lot of, like John said, up until that buildup of the reveal, after that reveal, he kind of became a jobber, for the most part. Is what it sounds like.
No, not
Yep.
a jobber. No.
No, I'm sorry,
Yep.
Dustin. It's an enhancement talent.
Enhancement talent,
Yeah.
please.
Show some respect.
We haven't even talked about the Hobgoblin in the TV show.
Yeah, I know.
No, we didn't.
Should
Voiced
we?
by Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill.
If we can make it quick.
Let's do it really quick. So when you watch the animated television show in the 90s, the Hobgoblin is the main goblin in the TV show, despite the fact that if you read the comics, the main goblin before that was the Green Goblin. Part of that was because at the time the Green Goblin was dead, so the main goblin was the Green Goblin. No, the main goblin was the Hobgoblin in the comics, and so it became the main goblin in the TV show. And then I think part of it was because you guys can correct me, but I think part of it was because they'd done like a toy license that said that we have to make toys based on the TV show, and they'd started to make toys on the Hobgoblin. Again, I think because of the comics, they had the comics had the Hobgoblin in them because the Green Goblin was dead. So they had a deal with the toy publisher where we have to make Hobgoblin toys, so you have to put Hobgoblin in your TV show.
But I think it worked for the TV show because it flipped the story on its head by having Hobgoblin first, and then you get to build to Norman Osborn's fall from grace. Well, he wasn't even in grace to begin with. Like, he was always a shady character in the show, but
yeah,
he still loved his son and stuff. But he was involved with Kingpin, and I think he had something to do with the Spider Slayers as well, and
yes,
all this business. But yeah, because Hobgoblin got introduced first, that meant that Norman already had all that Hobgoblin gear on hand, which when his experiments went wrong and he got infected with the Goblin formula, it was there to kind of take advantage of, and you become a version of the Green Goblin.
I thought it worked really well.
Yeah.
Really well, because you have the Hobgoblin as what you think is going to be the main villain of the piece. Because the Green Goblin, the Hobgoblin ends up being the guy that does a lot of damage and then works with the Kingpin and stuff like this. He seems like the big bad, but that's why you establish Norman Osborn as a separate character. Because then later on you can have Norman Osborn turn to be Goblin after that. Doesn't that make so much more sense?
Yeah, and it made for a great episode as well when you had Hobgoblin versus Green Goblin.
Those are closing remarks on the Hobgoblin.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our deep dive on the Hobgoblin. The first of our 4 more Halloween-centered episodes for the month of October. We hope that you're having a great spooky season out there. Enjoy it. John, where are you at in your movie watching? You just saw Alien Romulus recently, right?
I did, which was pretty good. It wasn't the best Alien movie, but it wasn't the worst, so good for them.
Yep.
But now I am up to number 548 for the year.
That's double where you were last week. Holy hell. Well, not double. Double in the sense you went from 520 to 548.
Yeah. I mean, I did say last time, because we were sort of guessing where I'd be.
You made a guess.
I think I said I was going to be on 539, so...
Yeah, you did well.
Yeah.
All right. John, where can they find your reviews of Alien Romulus and many other movies?
On Letterboxd at Big John Bowski. Still all one word.
And Dylan, what's going on in the world of Explodey Plays?
I have good news for you. By the time we were recording this episode, I have finished recording all of the episodes of Pikmin. So that means by the time you're listening to this episode, which I assume you are listening to this episode and then also watching all of our other extracurricular stuff, if you go to Exploded Plays, there will be episodes of Pikmin already available right now on your show, because this should be coming up in the first week of October. So if you go to explodeyplays.youtube.com/explodeyplays/.org.com/explodeyplays, I will have some episodes of me playing Pikmin already up, available for you all, ready to go. It's all finished. I finished Pikmin 1. It's good to go. So check that show out. It's going to be amazing. It's the worst thing I've ever done. And it's available for everybody to watch because I think that, people need to see true tragic terror. They need to experience that. And I would like to think that I can show people just the worst time anybody's ever had playing a video game. And it's available right now, explodingplays.com, on YouTube, explodingplays.com/YouTube. I don't know how it works. explodingplays/YouTube. I don't know how it works. Just go to YouTube and then search for Exploding Plays, and then I guess that's it.
Yeah,
You'll see my face. Yeah, just look for Pikmin. Just look for Pikmin, and that's it.
Pikmin.
And if you don't find it, but you should find it by now. But if you don't find it, just watch the old Animal Crossing videos. That would make me happy.
Yeah, those are
and
great.
That's it. And then we'll work on people find you, Corey.
If you want to listen to more of me just talking, I have a second podcast called Large Old Cup. It is a stream of consciousness where I go into every episode not knowing what I'm going to talk about and kill about 28 minutes as I kind of just go with the flow and see what happens. No edits, nothing. I record straight into Audacity and load it up the second I'm done recording. So there is a new episode up now because I just finished before we started recording this one.
Is it about the Hobgoblin?
No, but it is about movies, John.
Ooh, I will give this a listen.
But yeah, thanks for listening to us. If you're listening to us on Spotify, check us out on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, check us out on Spotify. We'll be back next week with another spooky October-themed or Halloween-themed topic. Until then, goodbye.
Ooh.
That almost sounds like the Poltergeist theme.
Ooh.
Oh, I thought he was going for Doctor Who.
Yeah, we're just being spooky. Ooh.
Or the little song that Gizmo sings in Gremlins.
I remember that.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ooh,